She was only 25 years old. Her dress was torn up. Her skin was black and blue from being hit too much. Dirt covered her face. Her lips were dry and cracked. Her body lay twisted in the desert sand, half covered by dead palm leaves that someone threw on her like garbage. Most men would have walked past her. They would have thought she was already dead. But when Jake Cooper moved those leaves away, he saw she was still alive, just barely. Her eyes opened a little, foggy and far away. Then she whispered something so quiet he almost thought it was just the wind. "Bury me here," she said. "Not save me or help me. Just bury me here." Those words hit Jake harder than any bullet ever had. He stood there frozen, looking down at this broken young woman. For a moment, he remembered all the bad things from his past. He had buried people before, back in the war. Good people too. Now think about this. You are Jake. Your wife is already dead and buried. Your daughter Rose moved far away to another state. You live alone every day, taking care of cattle under a sun that doesn't care if you live or die. Then you find a young woman whose family was killed by men like you used to be. She's not asking for help. She's asking for a grave. Tell me, would you walk away? Or would you kneel down there, hands shaking, knowing that saving her might mean facing the bad things you did that no man wants to talk about? Jake's chest hurt as he looked at her face. All the years of dust and being alone felt lighter than the weight of those whispered words. He could walk away. Nobody would blame him. The desert is full of forgotten people. But something inside him wouldn't let her become one of them. Maybe he saw his wife Sarah's face in hers. Maybe it was God giving him one last chance to do something right. Jake bent down, picked her up gently, and felt how weak her body was in his arms. Every step back to his horse, he knew this was not just chance. He wasn't just carrying a half-dead girl. He was carrying the truth about his past that he thought he had buried forever. Jake carried her back to his ranch just outside Tucson. The sun was already going down behind the desert hills, making long shadows across the dirt yard. His place was simple. A couple of barns, an old cabin, nothing fancy. He laid her down on an old bed, gave her water from a tin cup, and for the first time saw a little color come back to her cheeks. Her name was Beth Williams. Her voice was rough as if even her name had been beaten out of her bit by bit. Between sips of water and short breaths, she told him pieces of her story. She had grown up far from here in a small town that was burned down when she was a little girl. Her parents died in one night, the whole place wiped out. Since then she had been passed from one cruel person to another, until finally she was sold to a house in Tombstone. She laughed once, bitter and empty, saying it wasn't really a house at all, just a cage where men came to buy what was left of her. Jake sat in the corner, hat in his hands, feeling each word like a nail being driven into his chest. He knew stories like hers. He had made stories like hers. Years ago in the war, he had ridden with men who burned villages, who left women and children to take care of themselves in the ashes. He had told himself it was to survive, that it was orders, that it was just how war worked. But now here she was, living proof that the fire they set had not only destroyed a town, it had burned into the life of a girl who had barely learned to walk. Beth didn't know. Not yet. She only saw an older man who gave her water and a roof and for the first time in years did not hit her. She even managed a small smile through swollen lips. A smile that cut Jake deeper than her bruises did because he knew something she didn't. He knew the blood in her story might just be the blood on his own hands. And here's where you need to ask yourself, what happens when the man who saves you turns out to be the same man who once helped destroy you? That question alone is enough to keep you reading because you and I both know the truth can't stay buried forever. Trouble has a way of finding men who try to live quietly. Only a few days after Beth could walk across the room again, the sound of horse hooves broke the quiet of the ranch. Jake stepped out onto the porch, one hand resting near the old gun hanging by the door. The rider slowed to a stop, dust swirling in the air. It was Buck Stevens. People in Tombstone knew this man too well. Tall, mean-eyed, and proud of never working an honest day. He made his living dragging women back to that so-called house in town. He got off his horse, spit into the dirt, and gave Jake a long, crooked smile. Where is she, old man? His voice was slow, lazy, carrying that ugly confidence of a man used to getting his way. Jake stayed quiet. He just looked at Buck, the shadow of his hat hiding his eyes. That silence was heavier than iron. Buck shifted on his feet, uneasy. He was used to men who looked down. Men who stepped aside. But Jake Cooper stood steady. Finally, Jake spoke, voice low and even. She is not yours anymore. Turn around. Buck chuckled, but it was thin. You think you can keep her? She belongs back where she came from. Jake stepped off the porch, moving down into the dust. His hand moved near the gun. Not drawing yet. He didn't need to. The way he stood said everything. He was not going to let this man touch Beth again. The air was tight as wire. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rattling the barn door and the leather creaking of Buck's saddle. Buck's grin faded. He saw something in Jake's eyes, something cold and steady that told him this was not a fight worth having today. With a curse, he climbed back onto his horse. This isn't over, he spit, then pulled the reins hard. The horse kicked up dust as he rode off toward Tombstone. Inside the cabin, Beth heard every word. She held the blanket tight by the window, eyes wide. No one had ever stood up for her before, not once in her whole life. The sound of horse hooves fading into the distance felt like the first time the world had given her a little space to breathe. Jake closed the door behind him and sat down in a chair, heavy with thought. He knew Buck's kind. They never backed down. They gathered friends, held grudges, and always came back harder. Jake felt it deep in his bones. Trouble wasn't leaving. It was just waiting. The desert has a way of keeping promises, even the ugly ones. A week had not passed since Buck Stevens rode off cursing under his breath, and already the trouble he promised came back around. It was late evening when Jake smelled the smoke. He rushed out the cabin door and saw flames climbing up the side of his hay barn. Sparks jumped into the sky, carried by the hot summer wind. 3 riders were riding away fast, their laughter echoing faint across the desert. Jake raised his gun, but put it down again. Shooting into the dark would do nothing but waste bullets. Instead, he ran to the barn, beating at the flames with a shovel, his lungs full of smoke. Beth tried to help, carrying buckets of water, but it was no use. By the time the fire died down, half the barn was gone, and the air reeked of ash. Jake sat on the porch, his face black with soot. The barn had stood for years, built with his wife's father. It wasn't just wood and hay that burned. It was memory. The next morning, a familiar figure rode up. Marshal Wade Harrison, his gray beard caught the light, his badge pinned to his vest. He had been Jake's brother in arms during the war, and now he carried as much weight in this territory as any judge. He listened as Jake told what happened. Then he shook his head slowly. These men won't quit, Jake, not unless someone with power makes them. Later that day, Harrison met Buck and his crew in Tombstone Saloon. The air inside was thick with smoke and whiskey, the kind of place where law only walked if it had teeth. Harrison's voice carried through the room. You boys set fire to a man's barn. That's crossing the line, and you know it. If you want to stay breathing in this county, you're done chasing that girl. Even Buck, drunk with courage, knew better than to laugh in Harrison's face. The marshal had weight with both lawmen and outlaws, and a word from him could turn the town against you. Buck scowled, but he said nothing. One by one, his men drifted out of the saloon, leaving their drinks behind. Back at the ranch, Jake told Beth the news. She was safe, at least for now. But he could see the doubt in her eyes. She knew men like Buck never truly gave up. And here's the part you'll want to hold on to. A barn can be rebuilt, but some things that burn never stop smoking. Jake may have won this round, but the real fire is still waiting, deep in the truth he carries. The fire at the barn faded, but the smoke in Jake's heart stayed heavy. Beth was safe for now, but safety never lasts long on the frontier. In the quiet nights that followed, as the crickets sang and the desert cooled, Beth began to ask about his past. At first, Jake avoided her questions, keeping his eyes on the cattle, the stars, anything but her gaze. But a man can only carry his ghosts so far before they start walking beside him. One evening by the fire, Beth spoke of the town she lost as a child. How soldiers rode in, torches blazing, and left nothing but ashes and screams behind. Jake stared into the flames, and in them he saw the faces of that night. Faces he had tried to forget. His voice broke when he finally said it. I was there, Beth. I rode with them. Didn't stop it. Silence filled the cabin. Beth's hands shook, but her eyes stayed on him. In that moment, she saw not just the man who had carried her from the desert, but also the man who had once stood by as her world burned. Days passed. Beth's body healed, but her heart carried a new weight. She cared for Jake, maybe more than she wanted to admit. She saw the kindness in his hands now. The way he never raised his voice. The way he gave her space to breathe. Yet the truth was a scar too deep to stay hidden. One morning she packed what little she had and stood by the doorway. You saved me, Jake, she said softly. You gave me a chance to live again, but I can't stay here. Some wounds never close. Jake nodded, eyes wet, though his face was steady. He knew she was right. Watching her ride away felt like losing his wife all over again, and his daughter too. But as her figure grew smaller against the desert horizon, he also felt something else. He felt lighter, as if the truth he carried had finally been spoken into the open air. Out here in the West, not every story ends with lovers under the same roof. Sometimes the truest endings are the hardest ones. The ones where forgiveness comes not in staying but in letting go. And maybe that's the lesson tucked inside this tale. That a man is not only the worst thing he ever did. That making up for past wrongs can live in the choice to protect someone even if the past can't be undone.